Welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday, brought to you by the Rogue Painter. Today we're going to be looking at the Sigmarite Mausoleum buildings that came with issue 11 of the Mortal Realms magazine. You can find a link to that issue review down in the description below. And so let's have a look. First of all, I went ahead and primed this with a layer of Mechanicus Standard Grey. You can use any sort of dark grey, but that was the one that I used. And next up, I'm going to take a 50-50 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Dawnstone. And I'm just going to use this mix slightly thinned down to pick out any of the half-rounded pillar post type areas around the mausoleum, or around this particular building, as well as the hourglass and any of the skulls that are around the sides. So if you'd like to go ahead and start working on yours, like I say, this is just a couple of thin layers. It's not going to stand out too much, but it's just so that when we do our next stage of dry brushing, it will pick out these elements and make them stand out even more. But we're just putting on a thin layer for now. So I will be back in just a few minutes. And welcome back. So once that's all done, we're going to take a medium dry brush, and using the Dawnstone, we're going to wipe the excess off of the brush here and give the entire model a brushing of the Dawnstone. And the idea here is to pick up all of those edges and some of the sort of the surface texture on the flatter areas. What this will also do is brighten up those areas that we just put the 50-50 mix on. So that's all the pillars, the skulls, the hourglass, and little areas like that. So if you'd like to go ahead and start dry brushing yours, then we will be back in just a bit. And welcome back. So next I'm going to take some Othwan Grey and a very well used round dry brush. Now you can use any kind of brush for this, that's, you know, an old brush, bit heavily worn, or just a regular, you know, Citadel dry brush, small dry brush. So I've just loaded up the bristles there, and again wiping off the majority of the excess. And now I'm just going to go around certain areas like the top of the hourglass here, some of the more sharper edges and the skulls, just to pick them out a little bit more, make them stand out a little bit. The reason I'm doing the skulls as a stone here is, to me, these aren't real skulls, so they wouldn't be skull coloured. A lot of this is moulded into the stonework. It is all stone, so to keep things nice and simple, we're going to have plenty of skulls to paint later on in regards to the railings and the base that comes with issue 15. But for the buildings, we'll keep it nice and easy and just make these skulls out of stone. One thing I will say about this is you'll notice one of my gargoyles on the top of the building is missing, and that is because they are very flimsy in the area that they are mounted to. There's not a huge amount of surface area to make contact with the gargoyle, so I will advise being extremely careful, as it does tend to break off. So be aware of where you are holding it and where you are keeping your index finger, which is how I broke mine off, resting my index finger on top of the gargoyle. It's not a problem. Once I've got past the dry brushing stage, I'll glue him back on, but I just thought I'd mention that just so that you guys can be aware of it. So if you'd like to go ahead and just pick out some of these sharper edges, give them a nice bit of highlight there, and we'll be back in just a few. Welcome back. So next we're going to take a large base brush from Citadel, though you can use any large flat brush or just a regular brush, and using some corn red, we're just going to paint in the top of the mausoleum here. We're going to do this with a few layers of slightly thinned down red and get a nice even coat there. Don't worry too much about getting it onto the stonework. Obviously try to minimise it as much as possible, but you can always go back over and just touch up some of the stonework if need be. So this is the triangle piece here of the roof, plus the three main panels on both sides. And at a later time I do decide to do the pyramid type pieces on the four corners. So if you want, you can do that now, but I do go back and do it later on in the video. So if you'd like to go ahead and start painting yours, like I said, with the corn red, and we will be back in just a few. So once you have the red of the roof done, it should look something like this. And next we're going to take some iron breaker and again apply this to our palette, thin it down slightly, and we're going to use this to paint up the gates on either end of the building here. So just give it a nice even layer, or a couple of layers, getting down the bars there. Make sure to get the underside and top side of the crossbars as well, and if you can, or if you want to, just turn the model upside down just to get the inside, although it does seem dark enough in there that you don't really need to paint too much on the back of it, but just to be sure I went ahead and did that anyway. So like I say, this is just the gates at either end, so if you want to go ahead and get working on yours, we'll be back in just a tick. And welcome back. So once that's done, we're going to take some Balthasar gold, and using a standard brush we're going to apply a couple of thin layers of this all along the support areas of the roof. So it'll be the piece along the top there with the spikes, down these two studded strips that are either side of the pyramid piece in the center there, as well as the ends of the building. Also any of the other spiky points, so it's the four corners, the little ball and spike on the ends there, as well as the spikes that line the bottom of this area here. So that's these spikes here. So if you want to go ahead and paint them in, and we'll be back in just a moment. So once all that's done, I'm just going to take a 50-50 mix of Ulthuan Grey and Dawnstone and just put on a highlight down some of these posts, or the majority of these posts. This is going to get dulled down a little bit. It does stand off quite a bit to start with, but it's just laying the foundation for what we are going to do a little bit later on. You can miss this step if you wish, and go straight onto the next one, but as you can see I'm just going down, picking off a highlight as well as the vertical. So if you want to go ahead and do that, working your way around all the columns there around the building, and we'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back. So as you can see here, I decided to paint the rings at the bottom of the skulls on the side of the building with the Balthasar gold as well. So next we're going to take some Agrax Earthshade, and we're going to use this to give the building a bit more of a dirty, grimy look. You can see I'm using a size 6 round here, but you can use any large wash brush or any large round brush. But like I say, we're going to apply this over the entire model. The flatter areas, obviously, we'll try to give it a slightly flatter look, but we don't mind if we do get some streaks in there, as this is supposed to give the idea of just dirt and rain and years of neglect showing through on the building. If you don't want that grimy look, then you can go ahead and just apply it to any of the cracks and recesses on the building, leaving the large flat areas, you know, free. But as the look I'm going for is a dark and grimy look, we're going to apply this over the entire model. This will also dull down the the highlights that we did on the pillars and posts. What we also want to do is not let this dry fully when we move on to the next stage, as we're going to be doing a little bit of blending between this and some Hexwraith Flame to give a sort of a mossy effect. So if you'd like to go and apply the Agrax Earthshade to your model, and we'll be back in just a minute. And welcome back. So before that has had time to dry, we're going to take some Hexwraith Flame and apply that to our palette. You do not want to take this from the pot, as mix it in with the brown, it is going to stain your pot and possibly contaminate the colour in the pot. So working from the palette, we're just going to apply a small amount of this to just some areas where we would like some moss to grow. Now this step you can leave out if you want. Again, this is just to give it part of that old, neglected, weathered look. What this is doing is giving a green tint to some of the brown areas with a sort of stained look. It's a good way of painting on moss without using some sort of moss material or a moss mix using flock and glue and paint and things like that. So it will look more flat than if you were to use a textured paint or something, but it does give a good effect for some moss. So if you'd like to go ahead and apply this to any areas that you would like some moss on your building, and we will be back in just a bit. And welcome back. So once that's had time to dry, we're going to take some Nylock oxide, and we're going to use this to start weathering all of the brass or copper areas, whatever they're supposed to be. And you can take this straight from the pot and just apply this to anywhere where you want the weathering to be heaviest or the erosion to be heaviest. So usually I do this anywhere where water would collect or run down, as well as around each of the rivets and studs that are holding it in. What we are going to do is apply this liberally with some blobs as such of this, and then over the top of that we're going to take the Nylock oxide, and after dipping our brush in, just pull away some of the excess and then paint over everything that is that Balthazar gold. And what this will do is give it a very heavily weathered look, but as there won't be too much oxide on the brush, it will stain the gold but leave it showing through. So if you want to go ahead and do that, and we'll come back in just a bit and you can see what that should look like when it's done. So you can see here the effect that the Nylock oxide is given once you apply it all over and have left it time to dry. At this point I decided that I wanted the corners here red, just to tie it in a little bit more with the roof, as well as the rest of the mausoleum set. We'll be able to paint certain areas on the buildings with this cornbread and the fences, and that will tie it all in together as a single piece rather than having everything look different. Okay, so next up I'm going to take some Oth1 grey, and I'm just going to pick out any sharp edges that don't have any moss on them and apply this to sort of all the corners, also along the skulls and the shields, just to pick off edges more. The reason I say not on the mossy areas is obviously the highlight wouldn't show through the moss. So what I do is just bring it down, and when it comes towards a green bit of moss area, just pull the brush away, and it looks perfectly fine. You could do this in reverse. You could put this on first and then you do your moss. The only problem with that is the moss wouldn't mix with the brown, the Agrax Earthshade that was there. So again, I'm just picking off any highlights and details, edges and things like that, just to give a nice highlight with this Oth1 grey. So if you'd like to go ahead and do that with yours, and we'll check back in just a moment. And welcome back. So now it's time to add some rust to the gates on the ends of the buildings. So for that we're going to take some Rhinox hide, and again using my really badly messed up beaten old round brush, we're just going to dip it into the Rhinox hide, and you can see there covering half the bristles, and we're just going to dab this in any areas where we want the rust to be. So just picking off a few areas, and this will be the base for our rust. So if you want to go ahead and do that, and we'll be back in just a tick. Okay, and once that's done, we're going to take some volcanic orange here from Reaper Miniatures paint range, although you can use Riser Rust or any other kind of orange paint with this. And I haven't cleaned off my brush too much, I've just given it a quick flick out in the water and then dried it off, so it does have a little bit of that brown in there, and this will help with the rust effect. And same thing, I'm just going to apply this over the brown areas, just sort of speckling and dabbing it about. The shape of the bristles here helps give that really speckled effect of rust on there. So if you'd like to go ahead and do that with yours, and we'll be back in just a bit. And welcome back. So once that's done, we're going to start working on the roses on the side of the building, and for that we're going to take a 50-50 mix of pink horror and corn red. So again, using a standard brush, we're just going to pick out all of the roses with this. This is slightly thinned down as always, and it will take a couple of layers to get over there properly, but we're just going to cover all the areas. Don't worry too much if you go onto the leaves that should be green, we'll just apply some green over the top of them. But if you'd like to go ahead and paint up all the roses on both sides, we will be back in just a minute. Right, with that done, we now take a mix of pink horror and a little bit of white just to get us a highlight, and I'm just gently touching the tops of the roses. This is just to pick off the edges of the roses for some highlight. There's not too much paint on the bristles here, just enough to pick the tops off. This will give a slightly heavier effect than dry brushing. Dry brushing I find gives a bit more of a chalky effect. We want something a little bit more coverage here, but just give it a gentle brush over, and we'll be back for the next step. Okay, and the next step is to add some Carroburg Crimson to shade in all of the recesses on the roses. This will give some depth to the roses, and because we put that brighter highlight on the top, although it will tint it slightly, it will bring the whole thing together, leaving the dark areas down in the roses, and then just a slightly reddish tint to the highlights there. So again, be very careful where you're applying this. You don't want to get it on the grey that we've already done, just in the roses, and then let it dry for about 10 minutes, and we can then move on to the last few steps. So if you'd like to go ahead and do yours, and then wait until it's dry, and we'll be back in just a minute. And with that done, I'm just going back in with some Hexwraith Flame now that the previous area has dried, and I'm just going to apply a small amount of this, not a lot, just sort of speckling it on, just to get a bit more of a vibrant green on there. We don't want any real paint on there. We do want to use this technical paint, as it is very, very diluted, but still has enough pigment there to produce a bit of colour without being too bright. So if you want to do this step, then go ahead and do so. If not, it can be left out, but I feel that it just gives a little bit more depth to the moss area here. So we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, and time to move on to the final steps. So I'm just going to take some of that pink horror and corn red mix, and I'm just going to pick off any of these sharp edges on the roof here, So that's the top piece down the angled sides here, as well as the corners of all of the red bits on the corners, so these areas here. And then we can go ahead and move on to the final stage. So we'll be back in just a minute. Right, and moving on to the final step, we're just going to take some Cabalite Green and some Warpstone Glow, and using a brush with a nice point on it, we're just going to go in and pick off the leaves with either of the colours. So for me, I'm just picking off a few with the Cabalite Green, and then the remaining ones with the Warpstone Glow. You can use any combination of greens that you like for this. These are just two of the ones that I feel work nicely for me. I don't worry about highlighting something as small as leaves, though you can, if you want a high detailed piece, go in with just a brighter tone or lighter tone, mix some white in with it or a bit of yellow, and pick off a few highlights. Just noticed the top of the spike there was a little bit wonky. I think I pressed on it a little bit too hard, so again, be careful with some of those fragile areas on these buildings, the gargoyles and the various spikes on top, when you're handling this. But yeah, if you'd like to go ahead and paint your leaves, we'll be back in just a bit. Right, and there we have it, guys. That brings us to the end of today's video. This is the finished piece. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I am working towards my first goal of 100 subscribers. As of this video, I am at 55, so just over halfway there now. If you enjoy the videos, then obviously subscribing is going to give you notifications of when new videos go live. I do have videos every Monday for this, for Mortal Realms, and I am looking into doing a 40k version for Fridays, as well as the odd mix of tutorials here and there. So once again, thanks a lot for joining me. Take it easy, and I shall see you guys next time.